there are but three sorrows of storytelling, and of these the tale of Deirdre comes quick to mind. Now it began at the home of Malcolm Harper, a piper, and a good man by all accounts, but, and that was the start of it, Malcolm was curious to a fault about the future, and whenever gypsies or soothsayers passed through his village, well, he would pester and badger them, and cross their palms handsomely with silver, and they would tell him some of this and some of that, and Malcolm would think his money well spent, until the day, that is, when the soothsayer's words went very much against him. He was to have a daughter, it seemed, and on her account the three bravest heroes that Ireland ever knew were to lose their lives, and there was to be more bloodshed over her, who was to be named Deirdre of the Sorrows, than there had been in the whole of Irish history before. Well, soon as ever that child was born, as sure enough she was, Malcolm stole her away from his wife, and hid her in a deep hollow under a faraway hill, with no one but an old widow to mother her, and neither man nor woman saw hide nor hair of her for 16 years. But during this time, unbeknown to all in the world above, Deirdre and the widow were watched over by the little people of the hollow, who had welcomed their coming, especially that of Deirdre, for there is nothing that they like more than a human child to nurture. Well, over her they crooned many a sweet, sad song, and told many a wondrous tale. And the truth is, that by the time those 16 years were past and gone, there was not a single riddle that Deirdre could not answer, nor fairy dance she did not know, nor melody she could not sing. But she knew not the warmth of the sun, nor her own kind, and as she grew, she began to dream more and more of life above, and every night before sleep, she would wish herself in that world. Well, wishes often come to pass, though much less often as first intended, and so it was to be for Deirdre. It was the night before her 16th birthday, when rain clouds, dark and heavy and fit to burst, swirled over the hollow and in all the surrounding country too. For the little folk, whose moods were wont to affect the weather, had come to know of Deirdre's wishing, and they were oh so loath to lose her. But in the world above, it was those very signs of rain that soon caused an old hunter to stray close to their hollow in search of shelter. Oh, the little folk could hardly bear it, and they seethed and flushed with fury as he came close. But they behaved so against their own best judgment, knowing all the time that Deirdre would be quick to enquire as to the cause of such bad temper, which she did, and the clouds grew darker and darker and heavier, until finally it could all be contained no more. And as the little folk cried out, confessing the truth, the clouds above ripped and burst their seams, and huge torrents of rain fell, pelting the hillside and all around for miles and miles, until the land was quite sodden through. Now it was not long before that hunter came to an intricately carved stone door, deep set into the hillside and partially obscured behind a dense thicket of briar and a wild rambling rose on thorny stem in full and fragrant bloom. And he cried out, pleading in the Holy One's name, to be let in from the storm. Well, that night, Deirdre learned much from him about the world above, including news of the 3 sons of Usnach, Alan, Arden, and Naoise, who were renowned throughout the land for their brave and heroic deeds. Now all 3, she was told, were fine young men, with hair as yellow as the corn, skin as white as the milk, and cheeks as red as the setting sun. Yet Naoise, the elder, was the most noble of the 3, and the strongest and tallest man in Ireland too. Oh, Deirdre was enthralled by this, and more eager than ever to see the world for herself. Though as the night passed, the little people of the hollow, who had watched over her since she was a babe in arms, began to fade away into the ether, slowly at first, so that even Deirdre did not notice, but by dawn they had vanished completely. Now next day, before the old man went on his way, he promised the widow faithfully to say nothing of Deirdre in the world above. Oh, but unable to restrain himself, he went straight to the court of King Connor of Ulster and told him of the hollow and of the lovely Deirdre's charms and accomplishments. Well, it had not long gotten dark in the world when a loud and formidable knock had come to the hollow door, and the widow had replied quite sternly, though innocently enough at the time, that she would answer to no one save the King of Ulster himself. And that was how Connor and his men gained access to the hollow hill that night, and that was how he came to know the lovely Deirdre. Now Connor was well pleased with her, and straightway thought to himself that he had never seen in all his time as king a girl so full and pleasant as she, and before even he had passed an hour in her company, he determined to take her for his queen. And he raised her to his shoulders then, and he carried her from the hollow to the wide world above, and away with her widow woman to Ulster, where he installed her with pride at court, and gave her every comfort befitting a future queen. But Connor was a coarse and overbearing man, and his wooing ways were uncouth to Deirdre, and so she bid for time, saying, "Give me but a year and a day, my lord, then I shall become your queen." Well, it was very reluctantly indeed that Connor accepted this proviso, and in between times he made Deirdre promise not to look into the eyes of another man. And so time passed. Deirdre kept her promise. Plans for the royal wedding were set in motion, and Connor, King of Ulster, could hardly believe his luck. But one bright May morning, when Deirdre was strolling in the sun with her maids, 3 strangers approached on horseback, and as they came close, she saw that whilst all 3 were fair and fine, one was fairer and finer by far, and sat head and shoulders above the others in the saddle. Well, the words of the old hunter came instantly to mind, and Deirdre knew for sure then that these were the same brave sons of Usnach, Allen, Arden, and Naoise, of whom he had spoken. Oh, they were so fine, unlike any men she had seen before. But it was to Naoise, the elder, that she found herself drawn. Uncontrollably it seemed, yet it is so often the way. Well, it was on account of the horses that the 3 had ridden by that day, but it was to be on account of the lovely Deirdre that 4 were soon to depart. She could not help herself, you see, and when she had smiled openly at her in greeting, well, she had flushed and blushed, pink as a summer rose, and had not been able, not for all the discretion in Ireland, to turn her eyes away. And neither, it seemed, had Naoise averted his gaze either, in spite of his brother's warnings and the anguished whispers of Deirdre's maids. No, they were bound together now. Both knew it, and very soon after that, Allen and Arden knew it too, and shortly after, even Deirdre's maids were convinced of it. Now there had been a brief question of honour, but between Deirdre and Naoise, oh, such promise, it could not be forsaken. And so, without further thought of Connor, those brave sons of Usnach made haste away from that place, with the lovely Deirdre safe and sound in the saddle, with her arms wrapped tight around Naoise, and without ever a doubting glance behind, they sped with the strong spring winds behind them, far across the green meadow plain, to the rolling, rolling hills beyond, and on to the shores of the sea, where they put coracle to sail, and headed with speed across the water, to the sure safety of Alba in Scotland. Well, all that summer they lived there, free from constraint, and as Deirdre and Naoise came to know one another more, their love deepened, and when they were alone, at the close of each day, they would walk together through the glen where they had made their home, to the deep loch beyond, and there Naoise would sing sweetly to Deirdre, over and over again, of their wedding day to come. However, whilst love blossomed apace in Scotland, Connor's heart hardened by the day in Ireland, and not a soul could console him, nor make him forget, even for a moment, the charms of the lovely Deirdre, who was to have become his queen. And when his day came to a close, and he lay all alone, and oh so restless in his chamber, he schemed and he plotted against Naoise, and concocted from the depths of ill will and dark passion a strategy and a plan to lure the lovely Deirdre back to Ireland, where he would take her for his queen by sleight of hand and blade of sword. Well, it was autumn when Connor put his plot into action, convincing his uncle Fergus MacRoe to travel to Scotland with news of a royal pardon and an invitation to those exiles to return as free men and to feast with him in Ulster. It had been easy enough now, in the name of kinship, for Connor to deceive Fergus MacRoe, for he was uncle also to the sons of Usnach, and a great family man, and so, thinking Connor's pardon a fine and forgiving gesture, he set sail for Scotland without the slightest hesitation. Well, soon as ever MacRoe landed in Scotland, he began pleading with Deirdre and his nephews, as any uncle might, using every trick and turn of language he knew to persuade them to accept Connor's pardon. Well, for many days, MacRoe's words accrued no credence, for Deirdre and the sons of Usnach were greatly afeard of their king, and mistrustful of his pardon. So MacRoe spoke instead in high praise of Ireland herself, and of her own special beauty, and in so doing, he awakened within those exiles fond memories and keen yearnings for home. But Deirdre held herself back from such sweet sentiments, and she begged her loved ones beware. But MacRoe continued on and on in praise of Ireland, and soon the sons of Usnach were persuaded to return. Though on the eve of their departure, Deirdre was troubled by a vivid dream, in which she walked unseen through a desolate battlefield on Ulster's once green plain, where familiar streams and rivulets ran red with blood, and where young men in their hundreds lay limp and broken and slaughtered brutally to their deaths. And she looked on helplessly as the women folk came forward, searching that plain for their lost loved ones. Oh, and the shrill, haunting sounds of their keening cut into her deeper than any blade of the sword. For she was poorest to their suffering, and suddenly, oh, suddenly so convinced that she also searched that desolate place for dead loved ones of her own. Nishi, Nishi, Nishi. And Deirdre had cried out then, wildly and uncontrollably, and Nishi had come softly to her room, though dressed also for the battle, and he sang softly to her, over and over again, of their wedding day to come. Now when Deirdre awoke at the dawn of the day, she spoke with great fear and trepidation of her dream, and she begged her loved ones to remain safe in Scotland. Oh, but the young men yearned for the sight of Ireland once again, and would not be swayed by a woman's foreboding. And so they set sail eagerly, and Macro silenced Deirdre all the way with pledges of firm allegiance and the promise of protection from his own gallant sons, Daring Drop, Hardy Holly, and Fiallan the Fair. Well, after a brief span of time at sea, they landed upon Ireland's familiar shores, where they were welcomed by Macro's sons and their men. Well, all was as it had ever been, and the homesick sons of Usnach took pleasure in their return, and in high spirits they set off to Old Ulster to feast with Connor. Though as unwittingly they made their approach across the green meadow plain toward the court of the king, a terrifying and unearthly battle drone commenced, and suddenly a great multitude of Connor's men in full battle dress sprung from hiding and attacked brutally with orders to slay the sons of Usnach and their witless guardians, and to fetch the lovely Deirdre unharmed to his side. Though incensed by this deception, Macro and his men retaliated without mercy, making good their promise of protection to Deirdre and her companions. And in wild and terrible combat, unwitnessed in the whole of Irish history before, they laid low to the death 3/3 of Connor's men. And in the aftermath of that great bloodshed, foretold long afore Deirdre's birth, and shown to her in a vivid dream of the night, she fled weeping from that blood-red battlefield, with her loved ones at her side. And away they sped, back across the green meadow plain, with firm intent to return to Scotland. Yet soon as ever they set forth, word came to Connor, and he cried out in rage, and he summoned Duanan Gashar, his druid, and he commanded him to impede their retreat, so that he might take the lovely Deirdre for himself. And Duanan Gashar took up his hazel wand then, and waving it repeatedly through the air, invoking the power of charm and chant and best forgotten rhyme. He caused a dark magical forest of knotted thorn and twisted briar to rise up from the green meadow plain. But the brave sons of Usnach marched on undeterred, and Deirdre held on to Naoise as he fought his way through to the rolling hills beyond. Though no sooner were they free than the evil druid caused a cold grey sea to overtake them, sweeping them back onto the magic plain. But the brave sons of Usnach stripped their clothes from their backs, and Naoise, the tallest and strongest man in Ireland, raised the lovely Deirdre to his shoulders, and together they swam on. Oh, Connor flew into a madness when he saw this, and he commanded his druid to summon greater power unto himself, and to arrest the progress of those lovers once and for all. So obediently, Duanan raised the cup of darkness to his lips, and he drank deeply from it, and the grey sea froze around Deirdre and her companions, and the ridges of the waves about them became as the searing blades of swords. But still Alan and Arden swam on, and Naoise held Deirdre aloft from the danger. Though very soon after this, Alan and Arden, his faithful brothers, faltered in the face of those cruel tides, and they cried out to Naoise to save them. And he took them also then up upon his shoulders, first Alan upon his right, and then Arden upon his left, and he swam on till he could swim no more. And as the brave sons of Usnach sank to their deaths, a cry of victory resounded in the camp of Connor, and as instantly as it had appeared, Duanan caused the grey sea to vanish before ever the girl was drowned, and he made his way with his king to the green meadow plain, where Deirdre sat beside her dead in a pool of tears. Yet with no regard for her sorrow, Connor ordered a pit to be dug for those brothers, there and then beside a stream on the plain, without priest, without prayers, and without solemn song. And he walked toward her boldly then, and he claimed her as his own. Though as he did so, all the women thereabouts, who had themselves lost men in battle, gathered around her, and they held her close, and Deirdre cried aloud then, piercing the night with her pain, and neither king nor druid could lift their heads for the weight of their shame. Now afterwards, Deirdre ran to the graveside, and she called over and over to the men to dig deep and to dig wide. And when later the once warm bodies of Alan and Arden and Naoise, her love, were lowered below and laid to rest, she prayed for their souls with the women folk, and she sang softly, I dreamt it last night that my love came in, so softly entered, his feet made no din. He laid his hand on me Deirdre threw herself into the grave with those brothers, lay herself down close beside Naoise, and broken-hearted she drew her last breath. Now it is said that later King Connor caused Deirdre's body to be raised up from that grave and buried at the far side of the stream, though it is also said by the generations of folk who have kept and preserved this sorrowful tale that a fir sapling sprang from the grave of Deirdre and from that of Naoise also, and that very soon after this those tender shoots united in a love knot above the stream.